Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. And today I'm looking at Vintagerack, the new AUV3 plugin from one of my favorite devs, Igor Vasiliev. Beat cutter dev, synthscaper, fieldscaper, soundscaper, sound saw, etc. I've done a lot of videos on his apps. Go and check those out. I'll put a link hopefully above on the top right there that'll bring you to a playlist on videos that I've done on apps by him. So what is Vintagerack? Well, actually, if we just click up has my mouse died here? Yes, it has. Okay, bugger the mouse. Top right, we have this question mark button, right? So this has all the help manual included. One nice thing is that when you leave it, like let's say here, I pop out, X out of that, and then I press the top right question mark again, it remembers its position, which is really nice. Another nice thing is for people whose eyes aren't great, you can zoom in, and for those people with better eyes, you can zoom out. So here also we get the introduction to what the app is, and I'll just give that a very quick little read. Vintagerack is a minimalistic and convenient multi-effect application that contains modules realistically simulating notable retro gear from the early digital age with their natural lo-fi and warm aesthetics. Basically, it's a way to give you a bunch of sounds that are reminiscent of actual hardware units from the 70s and 80s. So basically, this app is much less experimental than a lot of the apps that Igor has brought out. It reminds me most of classic FX rather than any of the other apps. And in the video today, we'll look at the interface. I'll let you hear each of the effects separately, but I'm not going to go in and play with every single parameter or whatever because it would just take too much time. But this will give you an idea of what the sound quality is like. Now, there's a few things that I'd mention first here. Well, before I do anything, let me give you an example. Listen to it. So let's see what we got here. So here I've got Nambu, two instances because I wanted a separate one for the bass, because I wanted to apply different effect to the bass sound. We're going to play the non-bass instance with an instance of Vintagerack that has auto wah, phase shift, insta flange, reverse delay, and space gate, which is basically a reverb. And then in the bass instance, we've got one that has some fuzz, bit of compressor, little bit of tremolo, and a very, very small amount of reverb, subtle amount of reverb. Let's have a listen first. Also, I'll just explain. I'm basically just sending out MIDI from progressions here. And I haven't bothered making a song because actually what it just generated randomly sounded pretty good for demonstration purposes. I'm also using an ARP bud here to bring in a bit of extra stuff. I'm running those through MIDI gates just to bring a little bit more variety into things. And particles, did I end up using particles in this? Don't think so. Don't think so. Let's see. No, I'm not actually using particles here. Yeah. Okay, so there's a little look at the routing page. You can take a screenshot of that if you need to. Okay, rewound is pressed. I'm going to bring this up, going to press play, and then I'm just going to bring in the Vintagerack instances. So let's first fatten up that bass. That sounds a lot better, a lot beefier, a lot chunkier, a lot more character. Now we can play with the output. We're completely cutting that there. And we can play with the input. So if you think something's a bit too over the top, it's very easy to adjust. And then we can also, of course, adjust each of these modules. So if we look on the left, we see blue input. Again, everybody, sorry, I don't have time to charge my mouse, which is clearly out of battery. I've got stuff to do and I'm getting this done before I get out the door today. But if we look on the right of the input, we've got that auto wah, and then basically on this main screen, we're always controlling something like the depth of an effect. Sometimes that's called presence and so on. But if we look down below that, first of all, we have mute buttons. So for example, we can hear just the reverb or just the reverse delay. We can put the reverse delay up and so on. That's just the flange, just the phase shift, just the auto wah. Now they're all muted. If we look over beside the last mute button, we also have a bypass button. And when we press on parameters here, we have a few EQ controls and some tone buttons. Now, mouse is magically working again. Okay, great. So if we look at this auto wah one, for example, we can see down at the bottom, we have parameters here. And here we can see various things. Like for example, here we can choose, what kind of filter we're using and so on and so on. So now there are actually 16 different effects in this. And frankly, the manual is not long. So I'm just not going to go into what each of these things does. You can check it out for yourself in the manual. We can see that in the module section. Different variables are explained. Okay, now one thing that's worth mentioning about the interface is, and this is something that personally I don't really like that much. If I compare this to Mixbox, for example, if this was Mixbox, if I long pressed here, for example, I could just drag it around and slide it between phase shift and insta flange. But in this, the way it works is, let's say, for example, I want to change the order of phase shift and auto wah. Here I can go in and we can see the different modules that we get here. We also have a second group of modules here, and we see here auto wah. So you see now auto wah is in the second slot, and the phase shift has moved over to the first slot. And it has also, if you've already got an instance of that loaded in the unit, then it will remember how its values were set. But personally, I would much prefer to be able to just drag things around. Another thing that I'm not all that crazy about is that you can only put 5, there are only 5 effect slots per AUV3 instance. I don't see any reason why, there couldn't be some kind of scroll thing so that you could actually have a completely full rack with 16 things in there. But it's not that big a deal. So what I did here, for example, is I made 3 instances. I just saved them into AUM. I called one rack 1, the next rack 2, and rack 3. And the way I set these up was following the most standard, or I mean, there are no fixed ways to do these things, but one of the classic ways of lining up pedals, which is, for example, first you have your auto wah, then you have compressor, you put the fuzz after the compressor. I mean, you may not want to use both the compressor and fuzz, you may not need to. You have an EQ after that. Then we go into the second rack, and the way that I set that up, it was to put tremolo, and then put various modulation effects. So I put the phasers and flangers, and you can see we've got 2 types of phasers and flangers. By the way, this tremolo vibe, you see this one can actually be a vibrato or a tremolo, and I'm using it here as a vibrato. If you're using it as a vibrato, the general way is to put it earlier in the chain. If you're using it so that's considered a pitch effect. If you're using it as a tremolo, that's a volume effect, and you put that later in the chain, right? So this one I just called rack 2, and then we have here, oh no, sorry, that's rack 2, hang on, there we go, check. Okay, so here, rack 3. So here we've got chorus, and there are 2 different types of chorus in this. And then we generally put on our delays. So we got 2 delays, general delay and a reverse delay, and then finally put the reverb. But of course, you don't need to, and it absolutely may not be desirable at all to follow this order. For example, putting a reverb into distortion can sound really good. So, feel free to experiment with these. But I felt that it'd be quite nice to have 3 presets set up and just call them rack 1, rack 2, rack 3, following that classic order. Again, though, don't really quite understand why we couldn't have more modules in each instance itself. So let's first just listen to each of these racks, and I'll mute everything basically, except I'll let you just hear one thing at a time. I'll just go from the first effect and let you hear what that's like, and then I'll mute the first effect and unmute the second effect and so on. And then I'll let you hear all 5 together. I'll also quickly click in each time to the parameters and maybe just experiment a little bit with those and let you hear what some of those things can do. But I don't want this video to get too long. Okay, let's move on to the compressor. Changing the ratios, attack and release. Okay, let's mute that. Go to the fuzz. So you can see here we have a little bit of modulation possibility. So you can see, as with Igor's last 1 or 2 releases, it has this nice compact interface. Basically, when the red is bright and the blue part is dimmed out, then when we drag on the knob, we are changing the first value, which is depth in this particular instance. And then if we click in the middle, we can see that this turns kind of blue. And now when we move that, we're changing rate. Okay, ring mod. For the EQ, we adjust our highs, mids, and lows. The amount and the frequencies. And then basically here we choose, for example, are we using a mid-pass, high-pass, low-pass filter or whatever. Obviously that would sound nicer with a bit of reverb on it. I could use another unit for that. So vibrato. Again, can adjust various waveforms and so on. This is where we change whether it's a tremolo or vibrato. So you can see here, vibrato being the second thing, it's controlled by the blue line. So you can see we've only got vibrato here, we don't have any tremolo. Phase shift. Phase box. Insta flange. Oh, so one thing I didn't mention yet is that for each effect you can control how many bits it is if you want to go for a more lo-fi sound. You'll notice, by the way, some things there's a little bit of glitching when you press them. I asked Igor about this and he said, you know, this is the way the hardware units themselves would work, and he didn't see much benefit in trying to get rid of that. Generally, these are more set up to adjust some of those variables before you're performing rather than during your performance. Easy flange, you can see, has a lot less stuff to adjust than Insta flange. Let's hear them all together. Now, if you see here, see this red? It just came up. So basically, that's clip in. So I kind of try it, you know, adjusting the levels of these, or just adjust the input, maybe. So that's something to look out for. You'll notice, by the way, depending on the setting of your input, sometimes adding an instance of this will bring down the volume, but that's, you know, very easily remedied by just bringing up the input. definitely hear the difference between 10 and 24-bit there. I'll maybe just point out here in the parameters, this fat, this is frequency attenuation, and it's just a kind of damping effect. Again, we can have a bit of modulation on the delay. The reverse delay. Now you can see some of these, it can be hard to dial things in exactly. So here you have the coarse setting, and then we click in here, and it's got the fine setting. To be honest, I'm really not a fan of this. It's very fiddly. Still not 100% used to that click in between those two things. So you can see how long it took me there to just change from a 0.25 second delay to a 0.5 second delay. Far too much time involved in that, really, to be honest. So, great sounding reverb. I mean, everything sounds quality. Delay up to, decay up to 8 seconds. Filters. We can also empty a module by pressing empty here. Now let's just stick all of these on. Mind you, we're not having a tremolo in here. Remember, we've only got the vibrato, so that's the only one that's missing. So the last thing I'd like to do is just very quickly take you through the presets. Be aware, that, of course, that if some of these are using time-based effects, delays, and so on, some of them may or may not sound good with what we've got here. Several ways we can scroll through presets. Using your internal host, or else we can, if I click A here and then click 1, then it'll play preset A1. So it works like that, basically. This you can use to copy a state and presumably paste it in some way, which I haven't looked into how to do. Personally, I'll be using the AUM internal preset system. But it'll be there in the manual. That's nice. I do like the fuzz. Not the police, I mean the distortion effect. That's nice. And again, you can see if you look at the presets that, most of them are not remotely following the classical idea of pedal routing, which again is totally fine and often going to lead to interesting results. So there we go. I think I've covered most of the things you need to get started. Like I say, up on the top right, we've got our manual. It's only going to take you 20 minutes to read through there. I would recommend what I did. The best way to do things is just go through particularly the modules one by one, and just very if there's anything that sounds unfamiliar. There are a few terms that might be, but in most cases, it'll all be stuff that you'll be familiar enough with if you've been using FX apps or hardware for a while. So what do I like about it? I think, it's got very nice sound quality. I wouldn't mind if it was a bit more experimental. I think most of us, what we really love about Igor is when he brings out the really crazy stuff. Only problem with some of the crazy stuff is that it can be hard to understand how to use. It'd be something like Beat Cutter, for example. But if you take something like Space Fields, for example, we had something that was capable of some radical sounds, but fairly easy to learn. So this is maybe not going to appeal so much to the user base who like those kind of apps. This is definitely more in the kind of classic FX territory. If you just want a cheap way to get a nice collection of good sounding modules and have some control over how to order them within a rack, then I think you might appreciate this. And you also may appreciate it if you're a fan of vintage gear, and perhaps you can recognize even just by hearing these, oh, that chorus was based on blah 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 unit and so on. Then obviously there's going to be a much cheaper way to get access to those sounds than buying those vintage pedals would be. But like I say, do wish you could have more than 5 modules in a rack. I wish you could have all 16 in a rack, and I wish you could just drag things around rather than using the current system, which I explained earlier in the video. All right, everyone. Oh, one thing, yeah, so forgot to mention at the start of the video, but you'll see it in the title anyway. Igor, always very kind with his codes, is offering 5 people the chance to win any Igor Vasiliev app for iOS. Remember also that a lot of these apps now work on, at least some of them anyway, work on Mac. I'm not sure which, as I'm pretty much purely an iOS person at the moment, but that might be something that you want to consider. And another thing, if you're into vintage stuff, recently I released a lot of videos by GSI, Genuine Soundware, doing generally emulations, but also some of their own things. Emulations of things like the Vintagerack, the Copycat, Space Echo, and so on. So if you're into vintage stuff, delays, reverbs, you may want to check out some of my recent videos. In fact, I put up one yesterday, and the giveaway for that is still open. I put up 2 yesterday, actually. One was a short showing the Space Echo pushed kind of to its limits when self-oscillating, and the other one was a comparison of the 3 different currently released for iOS anyway, GSI Echo machines, to kind of let you hear a little bit about the differences between these. So if you're interested in vintage sounds, I'd recommend checking out. Basically, pretty much all my videos this month have been on vintage gear emulations, because GSI have brought out so much stuff. All right, thanks again to Igor for the codes. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.